Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Week 4 in the books. Time to update the power rankings for the ACC heading into Week 5. And I think particularly in the middle of the ACC, it is getting nearly impossible to kind of rank and stack these teams. So what I did is I just made one really big tier of teams to watch. I don't think you can use the transitive property in the ACC because I think a lot of these teams are going to start beating each other. So this is just straight power rankings, right? A neutral site. What teams would I have favored over the other team? That is how I decided to stack these teams in the ACC. Look, we've been changing these rankings pretty much every single week, meaning I've been getting it wrong every single week. So I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section regarding teams that, I might be too high on, teams that it might be too low on. That is, at least in my opinion, the beauty of doing these rankings. So let it fly in the comment section. Of course, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start at the top. And, I think this is pretty clear. And what I would say is if Louisville can beat Notre Dame on the road this weekend, I'd probably move Louisville up to that title contender in the ACC. But as we sit right now, Miami and Clemson, I think are by far not only the best and most talented teams that you see, but I think largely the most complete teams that you see as well. Let's start with Miami. I get it, the narrative. Miami always has a lot of early season hype, a lot of preseason hype, but it never really pans out in the fall. Look, we're seeing it pan out. And I think it starts with the quarterback, Cam Ward. This team, from a confidence standpoint, from a swagger standpoint, it feels different. Like Miami went down late in the second quarter against USF on the road. This team didn't flinch and just ran away with it in the second half. Like, you don't see that type of thing from former Miami Hurricanes teams. So not only do I think this is probably the most talented team that you see in the conference, but I also think they're playing up to that talent level. Quite frankly, maybe even a little bit better than what we expected. I think Cam Ward, as of right now, is hey, for my money, playing like the best quarterback that we see in the country. They're really strong along both sides of the line of scrimmage. The biggest question mark that we had for this Miami program was what that secondary would look like. I think they're largely playing very, very solid football. Miami's really talented. They have a Heisman caliber quarterback, and they're a really complete team that seems to have put it together from a culture and winning mentality standpoint. Give me Miami as the best team in the ACC. I don't think that's necessarily a hot take. Probably didn't have to go 2 minutes explaining myself. Number 2, Clemson. Look, this Clemson offense, 42.7 points per game. That's 11th in the country. They had a very bad first half, really just bad performance in general, specifically in the second half against Georgia. Ever since then, like, they've looked like a top 10 team. And I think the biggest storyline around Clemson is they're a little bit more explosive on offense than they were in 2023. The defense is still really, really good. You look at the ACC and say, I think there's a pretty clear gap between Miami, Clemson, and the rest of the ACC, with the caveat of, look, if Louisville goes on the road and beats Notre Dame, we're going to put Louisville in that title contender category. Let's talk about Louisville for a second. 40 points per game, that's 15th in the country. 8.3 yards per play, that's number 5 in the country. My concern about Louisville is you go back and watch that Georgia Tech game. Like, Georgia Tech outgained Louisville by almost 100 yards. That wasn't as dominant of a performance from Louisville as what might be reflected in the scoreboard. And so I really do like Louisville. I think Coach Brom is one of the best coaches in the ACC. I think Tyler Shuck is a massive upgrade from what they've had at quarterback last year. And they're about to get their star wide receiver back in Colin Lacey, who they grabbed in the transfer portal. A very underrated defense. Louisville checks all the boxes. Now we got to see them go on the road and beat one of the best teams in the country. And I think if they can do that, we're certainly putting Louisville up as a legitimate title contender in the ACC. Going to Boston College, and again, I think you, quite frankly, from what I've seen, maybe could put Louisville alone at this tier and just lump Boston College with these teams to watch and that third tier. What I like about Boston College, there's not many holes in terms of what Boston College is as a team. Are they the most talented team in the ACC? Are they even in the top 5 in terms of most talent? Probably not. But when you start talking about teams that have a chance to potentially do something and kind of compete for the ACC, you want to see a complete team. You look at Boston College, they run the football a lot. I think Thomas Castellanos is a difference maker at quarterback. They play really solid defense, only giving up, 19.7 points per game. That's top 35 in the country. Solid offensive line, solid run game, solid defense. Not a lot of teams are as complete as Boston College in the ACC. I think they've had some impressive performances, not only against Missouri, where they lost on the road, but also really impressive win in kind of a sloppy game against Michigan State this weekend. Give me Boston College to be in that dark horse tier, but I do think there might be a little bit of a gap between Louisville and Boston College as we speak right now. Going to the teams to watch, and this is where it gets just so difficult. I'm going to go Georgia Tech first. I think you look at Georgia Tech and say, we know what they are. The defense has taken strides. They got to stop giving up the explosive play. We know this offense can put up a lot of points. You look at Georgia Tech, 6.5 yards per play. I mean, that they look phenomenal on offense. They're able to hit explosive plays. You got to finish your drives in the red zone. But if you're Georgia Tech, you know you can put up a lot of points on offense. Is this defense going to be able to win you football games down the stretch in 2024? That's probably the biggest question we have for Georgia Tech. You go to Pitt. Look, we ain't used to saying this about Pitt. They're averaging 40.3 points per game. That's 12th in the country. A couple of really impressive wins, right? Impressive win against West Virginia, who just beat Kansas. Impressive win against Cincinnati, who I believe just shut out Houston. I mean, those two teams are pretty solid out of conference teams in the Big 12. Pitt looked quite good against both of them. And I think the story is you bring in this new offensive coordinator, and Pat Narduzzi's just letting this offensive coordinator cook. I mean, Pitt is putting up a lot of points. They're an explosive offense. Now, I think the question mark you might have with Pitt is Eli Holstein, their quarterback, has been probably a little bit looser with the football than Pat Narduzzi would like. I think there's been a lot of turnovers that haven't necessarily happened for Pitt, but it's not like Eli Holstein is not putting the ball in harm's way. He's one of the tops in the country in terms of turnover worthy plays, but they haven't necessarily been turnovers yet. That's my concern with Pitt. I think the defense is not as good as we're used to talking about with Pitt, but I think that's a larger part of how good this offense has been and how explosive this offense has been. Like the recipe for Pitt in years past was, slow offense that's running the football and playing good defense. They've kind of flipped that and they're going really explosive on offense. We know we're going to give up some points on defense, but we're going to try to outscore some teams on the offensive side of the football. And so far, they're undefeated 4-0. It has worked so far. We're going to continue to monitor what that looks like when you start playing some teams more towards that middle to top half in the ACC. SMU coming in next. They finally made the switch at quarterback to Kevin Jennings, who I think is significantly better than Preston Stone. You had a really impressive win against TCU. My biggest concern for SMU is, are they good enough along the lines of scrimmage to consistently win in the ACC? I thought they did enough in the transfer portal in the preseason to be one of the better teams in the ACC. I don't necessarily know if you've seen that yet on the film. I do think the switch at quarterback has certainly helped. Their offense has looked astronomically better since going to Kevin Jennings, and that's kind of a storyline that I think a lot of SMU fans need to monitor. I think they're playing solid defense. This SMU team, I think, can be dangerous. I think they're talented. I think that offense can put up points. They're starting to run the football very effectively with Kevin Jennings at quarterback. Keep an eye on SMU, but we still have some question marks about them, and that's kind of the storyline for all of these teams in terms of teams to watch. And that's kind of why I lumped them all together. There are things that I really like about a lot of these teams and this tier, but there are also significant question marks I have with all these teams where you look at Louisville or Clemson or Miami and say, I ain't got that many question marks about those teams. Going to Syracuse, frustrating loss for Syracuse at home against Stanford. And I know it's kind of wild, right? I have Georgia Tech over Syracuse. I have Syracuse over Stanford. It's going to get really, you're going to see a lot of these teams beat each other. And again, that transitive property of evaluating teams, I really don't think is something that we can use in the ACC. I still think Syracuse has one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. So I'm going to keep them relatively high in terms of my power rankings. Kyle McCord did not play his best game against Stanford, and that was very evident. They almost were able to come back and win that football game. But again, when you're talking about the ACC, I don't think there's a ton of elite quarterback play. And I'm not saying Kyle McCord's elite by any means, but I do think he's one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. So I'm going to stick at Syracuse, still towards the top half of the ACC. Don't necessarily feel great about it. Going on to NC State, I think CJ Bailey might be an upgrade at quarterback. I think if you're an NC State fan, this has been a disappointing year, right? I think there were a lot of high expectations for NC State heading into 2024. Grayson McCall obviously has not worked out like a lot of us thought. You go to CJ Bailey. This kid's from an arm talent and athleticism standpoint, he is significantly more talented than Grayson McCall. Now, he doesn't have the 6 years of experience that Grayson McCall has. He's a true freshman, but he is really, really talented. And so I think NC State has an upgrade at the quarterback play in terms of the juice that he brings to the offense. My biggest concern for NC State is the line of scrimmage play and the defense is not what we normally think of with NC State. And we kind of said this heading in where we kind of just blindly trusted this NC State defense to be solid. We kind of just blindly trusted this NC State offensive line to be very solid because that's what we've gotten from Dave Doran over the last 10 years. It's not been the case to start 2024. I think they have the guys to be better than they're playing. And so I'm a little bit optimistic about NC State maybe getting better as the season goes on. And again, I trust Dave Doran just about as much as any coach in the country. Uh, but that's kind of a staple. And I do think they have the talent around the quarterback spot. So if they can get that offensive line going, if they can get this defense playing at a higher level, I do think NC State can be dangerous. But through the first 4 games, like I got to see it before I'm really pushing my chips in and on NC State. Virginia Tech, another team in the ACC that has probably been relatively disappointing. They've just had really slow starts. This is a team that returned pretty much their whole team from 2023. Really slow start against Rutgers, kind of battled their way back, but it wasn't enough. Really slow start against Vanderbilt, battled their way back, but it wasn't enough. I look at Virginia Tech and say we kind of thought the run game and the defense was going to kind of carry Virginia Tech and be kind of the identity of that football team. I don't necessarily know if we've seen that, and Kyron Drones probably hasn't taken that step in terms of the consistency that we want to see from him yet. Again, similar to NC State, like I think this team has the potential to be very dangerous in the ACC, but we haven't necessarily seen it yet throughout the first 4 games. Florida State, uh, the biggest takeaway here, I still have them relatively low because the DJU offense is still a disaster. The biggest takeaway, if you're a Florida State fan from that game against Cal, was that defensive line is back. At least it was back for week 4. If you're Florida State, you're looking at this team and say, if you can find some semblance of consistency on offense, and it's just been fits and starts pretty much all season, I think this Florida State defense might be turning the corner. Like by far the biggest letdown for Florida State throughout the first 4 games was this defense, specifically the front seven, the defensive line wasn't nearly as dominant as we thought they would be. I think there was a lot of people in the preseason that thought Florida State might have one of the better defensive lines in the country. Through the first couple of games, it wasn't even average. It was playing below average. It dominated the game against Cal. If you can get that defensive line performance consistently over the next couple of weeks, this Florida State team can be dangerous, but I'm going to leave them there because, again, you look at the offense and say, I don't trust DJU to score many more than 21 points per game. And that's going to be hard to consistently win when you have an offense that's turning the football over and just not finding any identity on the offensive side of the football. Cal, obviously disappointing loss to Florida State. The offensive line has massive, massive concerns. I do think there are elements of this Cal team that you like. I think their defense plays extremely well. I think you got a quarterback that's a little bit of a gamer. You have wide receivers that can make plays on the outside. The offensive line's been a massive question mark. It was a question mark against Auburn, but you were able to kind of get through that one. It reared its ugly head again against Florida State. Look at the Power 5 level, Power 4 level now. If you have liabilities at offensive line, it is hard to win games. And not only has that offensive line not been very good, but it's also dealing with some injuries now. So now you're getting into your depth. I got concerns about the offensive line for Cal, so relatively adjusting my expectations about this Cal team. Stanford, really impressive win against Syracuse. I don't know how consistently this Syracuse team will be able to win football games. Um, but Troy Taylor's kind of just putting it together. And again, I don't think the Stanford team is as talented as a lot of teams that you see in the ACC, but they are starting to string together some wins. we'll monitor Stanford. They might be a team that continues to rise in the power rankings. UNC, bottom half. It, it's a disaster on defense. I would be very surprised if Mac Brown makes it towards the end of the season. I get Mac Brown's a legend in the coaching industry. You can't give up 50 points in one half to a group of five team. And Mac Brown knows that. They are trying to find a quarterback. They've gone through three quarterbacks so far in the 2024 season. Big time question marks about UNC. Duke's 4-0, but I have them as a power ranking in the bottom half of the ACC. You look at their four wins, they haven't really been all that impressive. It was a one-score win against UConn. It was a one-score win against Northwestern, who I think might just be a really bad team. And then Middle Tennessee State is not very like. I guess what I'm saying is Duke's 4-0, but you haven't really been impressed when you watch the football with Duke. Virginia, Wake Forest to round it out. The North Carolina schools, they're struggling, right? Wake Forest, I think probably the least talented team that you see in the ACC, and then Virginia's kind of a roller coaster, but they're not a team that I will consistently have a ton of confidence in week to week. We'll see what that looks like going forward, but this is what I got for my ACC power rankings going into week 5. Look, I don't feel great about it. I think there are a lot of teams that you still are trying to figure out what they are heading into the rest of 2024. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.